all of the things that I've been able to do is because I have made a phenomenal selection in my partner. And I often talk to folks about, now, doesn't mean you have to have a life partner or be married, but if you choose to, that choice matters. They're going to be able to help you achieve your goals professionally and personally, or they may detract from your ability to do so.
I've asked people that have been married for 60 plus years about this particular topic, and they'll tell you there were years that we definitely were not on the same page.
They want the same things, but they have no idea. They actually think they're in competition with each other. They think one of them has to win and the other one has to lose, and it sucks.
Every single person that's been in a long-term relationship has had moments where they're not super excited about being around that person. Sometimes it's days, sometimes weeks, months, sometimes years for people.
We think we're supposed to get something, and sort of that, what are you doing for me lately mentality.
I wish I could go back to all the people who are thinking about getting divorced and tell them how stupid it is. All it does is make everything harder. It makes you feel more alone. So often in marriages, it's so simple in that somebody says, well, I'm just not in love with them anymore, or because they don't feel a spark.
Buddy, you were leaning towards a path where you're ready to get rid of a 20-year marriage because you decided to read a John Maxwell book or something like that. That can't be the path that we go on. What do you see as the single biggest killer in relationships? Like, what is the thing that over the 30 plus year career that you've had, what has been the biggest relationship breakdown that is consistently coming to the top?
Well, actually, two things come to mind. So I'll start with the first one. And the first one is this idea that we think that we're a consumer in the relationship, that we think we're supposed to get something, and sort of that, what are you doing for me lately mentality, and not working on looking within to see where is it that I am not growing myself or fulfilled in myself. And I think the not taking responsibility, which is pillar one. The first pillar is we're each responsible for our own happiness and well-being. And I think that one is, we might hear little bits of that kind of wisdom, but we don't really appreciate to the extent of personal accountability we need to have in order to create what we're looking for. And then the second thing I think is really lack of appreciation. And it's just human nature that we take for granted what we have. And so I think that it's really like getting to know how the partner feels appreciated most and feel cherished. And I mean, really, and as you asked for one thing, but it's always hard for me to say one thing.
No, it's okay. You don't have to give me one thing. This is the conversation
my
anyway.
Personality is, and that's why I had 4 pillars, because it just, there's so, and there's also just the lack of insight and growth. Some people, really struggle with having insight, or they just can't see it. They just only see that they're a victim to something, or that it's something happening to them. And there's always that part of the thinking system that can happen to the most insightful people, where you only can see when you're like emotionally reactive and dysregulated. We only see what it is that our partner is doing that's not right. And that's probably true that they are doing something not right. But still the key is the accountability we have and the opportunity that presents for growth. And so we really need support and help to do the opposite of what we feel like doing, and really start introspecting first. What is this reminding me of that I know is my growth area to begin with? What work can I do on myself that maybe I'm doing something similar that is being mirrored to me through their behavior or their lack of behavior? So I think, a lack of growth mentality and really trusting the process that whatever challenge is happening, it's for the good, it's for the benefit, to really embrace it so that you can grow.
Yeah, because once you come through on the other end, that's when the growth really does happen. I mean, the biggest challenge is, I feel so blessed because in our marriage, when we've had the biggest challenges, we've definitely come through the other side.
Yeah.
And there's been a growth that happens where you build upon it. So
Yeah.
it's not something that you're forgetting, but we also don't go back to it either, and what I mean by that is sometimes it has nothing to do with us. Sometimes it's just acknowledging and being self-aware that, let's take empty nesting, for example. It is weird and different.
Mhm.
when all of a sudden there's no energy in the house. You go from heavy energy with teenage boys and tons of energy happening and games every day to hearing your silverware hit the plate. Like, that is like the one thing. I sat at the dinner table one night and I heard us, like, we were like clink, clink, clink. And then Adrian gets up immediately and starts like cleaning up the kitchen. I'm like, hey, why don't we sit down for a few minutes? And we're having this conversation, but it's just all new. We're like setting all new standards. But as we get through those things, it really has nothing. It has some stuff to do with us, but it has to do with the change of environment and how the environment affects us. Even work. Some people go through work schedules, right? And their work changes and all of a sudden they're not home as much. How does that impact their partner? And are they aware of how it's impacting their partner, right? Not just how it impacts them, but how it impacts their partner.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's your fourth pillar? So we've heard the three. You may have said it already, but what is your fourth pillar, the last pillar?
Yeah. So the first is responsibility for our own happiness and well-being. Second is growth. We're here to use our friction to grow individually and closer. Third is priority. We make each other the most important other person in our lives. And the fourth pillar is purpose, is we use our love to make the world a better place.
That's great.
Yeah.
How and I would imagine that the Soulful Marriage and this project for you of writing this book, of putting everything out for everybody, is kind of that last pillar for you. Am I right?
It absolutely is. My husband and I, again, from studying the wisdom of Kabbalah, we studied many different spiritualities. We were born Jewish and still, connect with being Jewish, but we were always exploring lots of different spiritualities. And then we found Kabbalah, and it's just really like practical, logical, and spiritual, deep, wisdom. And we were learning how important it is to share, how we really came to give. And that's where true fulfillment is. And so we became more givers in the relationship. We also then started looking for ways that we can give and support each other in giving to the world. And then, with time, maybe it was about 10 years ago, I remember having a conversation over dinner that it was like, why don't we use our relationship to help other couples? And so I'm the therapist, I'm the writer. And so it became clear that I was writing it, but it's really on some level our book. The energy of us is in the book all the way through. I say he's the spine of the book. But it's an example of, and it's not easy. Like being purpose driven takes effort, but it's so much more fulfilling. And it's again counterintuitive. To be happy, we have to also sometimes go against what we feel like doing. And once you cross over and you start getting involved in putting in the effort, then it starts to sing. And so it's helped me individually to have this. When you asked me at the beginning, what's like next level, I'm always looking for like, what else can I do? How else can I share? Who else can I reach? And so this one stretched me, like we're here to kind of stretch our vessels, and this one's still stretching me. But the trickle effect, the relationship is, really, and I wrote about it in the book, like what I would describe as like a generosity of spirit, is that it becomes contagious, that, and it's not just about writing a book together, but any way that you can be keeping in your mind. I wonder how, with our time we have together today, especially being empty nesters, but at any time, with whatever time you do have, I wonder how we might be able to bring a meal to someone, or how we might be able to get involved in an organization or doing something that we'll never see directly the benefit from, but we know that it's doing something that's going to add value to someone's life, and kind of almost tithing really of your time and all of your resources.
Yeah.
And so then it's like we tag team, and like sometimes he sends something over to me, or I'll send something over to him. You might want this, think it'd be good to talk with this person, or and then you see that side of your partner giving, and then it's, in fact, research has shown that is attractive. That makes you more drawn to a person when they're altruistic and they're generous. So purpose is the best kept secret, is the least spoken about. It's never do people come into my, counseling office saying as a couple they're missing purpose. I have individuals feel like they come in missing purpose, but it's really not something that people are aware of, that it really can help take your relationship to a whole new level, to have something bigger than yourself, because it's not just about the two of you. You're tapping into you're into God. You're tapping into God. Is what you're doing, really.
If you like clips like this, I have a similar clip here. And if you want to watch the full video, click here.
I had a client come into me just last month. Just last month, she was frustrated that her husband did not seem to want to spend much time with her. He was pursuing their financial goals. He was trying to grow. Yeah, you've met guys like this, right? He's trying to grow and take care of his family, but the wife is not as happy at home. Have you seen this couple, man?
100 times.
Yeah. And what's the biggest problem with them, do you think? Like between the wife feeling unloved and him feeling like he's got to chase his dream. What do you think is the biggest friction point?
Well, it's the disconnect that they both want the same things, but they're coming at it from two different directions.
I love it. You nailed it. They want the same things, but they have no idea. They actually think they're in competition with each other. They think one of them has to win and the other one has to lose. And it sucks. It sucks. So two things that fix this. Anybody at home facing that issue right now? Okay. Scott, take notes. This will be beautiful.
I am. I got my notepad right here.
First thing that people do when they come into me like this, I say, all right, we're going to build the 6 pillars of your marriage. 6 pillars of your marriage. It's a marriage agreement. We're going to sit down and do what you should have done while you were dating. Okay. We're going to build you the arrangement that your marriage is going to operate under for the rest of your life. So I take them aside and then I say, don't look at them. Look at me. Look at me. Speak to me. Okay. Tell me what 3 things are mandatory in your relationship for the rest of your life that would make it sustainable. Sustainable is the word that we need to continue focusing on here, because if you're living a high performance life, you must be able to sustain it. Otherwise it will fall apart under you and you will check out at age 45 or 50. You're going to die or your marriage will die, one or the other. So you must be able to sustain it. Minimum amount of energy input. What's the most sustainable thing? 3 things. Okay. And they always start off saying, well, I want him to stop. Nah. Stop is not a thing. Okay. Your husband cannot stop a thing. Your husband also can't not do a thing. Your husband can do a thing. He is doing things. You would rather he do other things. Let's replace. Okay. Let's replace. Okay. Well, what would I rather he be doing? Okay. I want more. What do they usually say? I want more emotional connection with my husband. That's amazing. And I agree with you. That is necessary. If you tell your husband, who has no idea what that means, that you want emotional connection and he's thinking about work and how financially he could take care of the family, he will throw up on you because the emotions will disgust him. So let's make that measurable. Emotional intimacy. What does that look like to you, right? Scott, what does emotional intimacy look like to you? Let me ask you that question.
Yeah. So to me, I think I'm a Gary Chapman 5 love languages guy. So I'm definitely a physical touch and words of affirmation. So I feel emotionally loved when I have intimacy in my marriage and when I have the affirmation that that I'm doing for them, especially her, is being received and appreciated. And hold
on, I want to dissect those 2 pieces. Because
okay,
what you just said is perfect. You feel good when there's intimacy in your marriage and when the things you're giving to her are being appreciated. We need to make that more measurable. Because that's not understandable. You say that to a woman, she's going to say, what do you mean? You want sex and thank yous? Like, well, what do I do? Right? Okay, let's make that measurable. You said more intimacy. Yeah, I mean, yes. You said more intimacy in your relationship. What does more intimacy? Sex? Does that mean is that what you mean? Sex?
Yeah, I think that's one component. It's the most important component. So it's the start, because I believe that actually builds a closer relationship in a lot of other ways. When we're intimate, and I kind of consider there's 2 things that I've broken this down, and I want you to take it your direction, but I want to just divert for 1 second. Yeah. What I would say with intimacy is I've learned in marriage that I need 1 connection point every month, meaning that it can't just be getting together for the purpose of getting together. It's got to be real, connected, present. Like, beautiful. That's important to me. And I know that that's important to us. And I have to force that occasionally because that's something that I value very heavily. And so go ahead.
I'm going to use you as our model then. So you just listed all 3 things you need in a relationship. Intimacy. We're going to unpack that, make that even more measurable, right? appreciation, and 1 connection point per month. Let's make those measurable. Okay, let's make it so simple that a Martian from Mars, if they flew down, could read your instruction manual and be the perfect wife for you. Let's make it that simple, okay, so that everybody can understand. Sex, you talked about sex as one component. Sex, how many times a week are you looking for that would be optimal for you with a partner that you love? What are you thinking? 5 times a week, 20 times a week, 3 times a week?
Well, whatever we have, I'm always going to ask for more. So if
Okay.
it's 3, I want 4. If it's 4, I want 5. If it's 5, I
Okay.
want 7. But I would say 3 times a week is very fair.
Cool. And that's sustainable. That's not
Yes.
too low to be non-sustainable. So at least 3 times a week. Sex at least 3 times a week. Now, are we talking quickies? Are we talking like warm, intimate moments? An hour, 5 hours, hanging from the swing?
That's
we
the
doing?
one connection a month. I think at the end of the day, there has to be a moment where there's a separation. My wife and I have something called ROM, weekends or weeks, that we've been doing for over a decade. And we teach people how to do these, but it's the rekindle our marriage. And at the end of the day, if you take our second born son was born, we had this major disconnection because I thought I was doing everything right by taking the older one. She wasn't getting what she needed. We decided to separate, not separate, just to get away from the kids for a weekend. We go to the Caribbean. We're on a boat, on a ferry, and she hugs me and she goes, "This is our ROM weekend." And I said, "I don't know what that means, but it sounds great to me." And I said, "What does that mean?" She goes, "To rekindle our marriage weekend." And I'm a visionary, man. I took that to like 8 levels. So at the end of the day, I'm going to wine and dine her. I'm going to treat her like a queen. I'm going to do everything I can. And it was reciprocated. Everything I needed, everything we needed together, we gave each other. One-on-one conversation, my direct eye contact, the phone down, all the things we were learning about each other. And what I learned is our marriage really needed a couple of those a year. At the minimum, 6 months was the greatest. The norm was a quarterly separation. And so going back to answer your question, in doing those ROMs, I learned that there is a deeper connection that we have when we separate.
Mhm.
So I have to have a separation once a month where there is nobody else there and it's just us and there's no distractions and that connection is good. The rest of it can be whatever. I mean, the rest of it is serviceable.
Okay, so your 3 pillars so far. Sex, about 3 times a week minimum. You need at least 1 major reconnection point throughout the rest of the month, right? At least once a month and then 3 times a week. So there's 2 pillars for your marriage right there. Very measurable, very clear, and we've defined them, okay? A woman could walk in and understand exactly what you're saying now, okay? And number 3 was appreciation for things that you do for her. What does appreciation look like to you? How would you know that a woman was appreciating the things you had done for her? How would you know by looking at her or hearing her?
Well, again, I think it's interesting. We have to know ourselves and know how we feel loved. So, one of the things that I notice of a lot of friends and a lot of us in our lives, when we walk in the door after work, and we both work. So this is challenging. My wife's a school teacher, so she's been home for 2 to 3 hours by the time I walk in the door, sometimes longer. And life just keeps moving on so often. And so one of the things that we've talked about in our lives that we appreciate is that I kind of like it to stop for a second, for an acknowledgement, like it's respect, it's a hello, it's a kiss, it's something that just says, "Hey, I kind of missed you, even if I didn't, and it's good to see you." And that is a really simple thing. One thing I've never struggled with. So a lot of men that you're going to work with are going to struggle with actually knowing what they want, what they need, and actually showing it. I have not had that problem. I'm probably the opposite, but I'm not saying I'm the opposite where I need a lot of extra attention, but I do need a lot of extra attention.
I hear you.
But yeah, that's the point is that would be how I would define that.
That's wonderful. So you need to be greeted with joy
I like it.
when you enter. That's good. That's a good thing. You want to be greeted with joy, especially when you come home from work. That's fantastic. You need sex about 3 times a week, and you need a deep reconnection point with your partner about once a month. Those are your 3 pillars for a marriage. Those are that makes it sustainable. Okay. So I would sit a couple down and I would do exactly that process I just did. And then the other partner looks at them and says, "That's all you want? That's measurable? That's easy? I can do that." Right. And you've been fighting for 15 years trying to figure out what the heck they want from you. And they just did that right there. So then the other one, I go through with the process with the other one. They give their three. It's funny how often they overlap. We usually only get like 3 or 4 pillars, usually instead of 6, but up to 6 pillars where they all then we mesh them together. And I say, that's not your 3 and your 3. That is your 6 as a couple. Now we are going to agree. Can we as a couple agree that we both desire sex 3 times a week? And the conditions under which she would follow suit and say, yes, I can do that if this, right? Emotional intimacy, basis like that. Sex 1 to 3 times a week, one big reconnection per week. What wife is going to be like, nah, I don't really think I want to reconnect with you once a month on a couple's like, date night, right? No, they're going to love that, right? And then being greeted at the door. She'll probably say, you know what? That's a fantastic idea. If I'm the one who comes home, could you greet me at the door as well? Could we both just be happy to see each other? And when we pass in the hallway, could we be happy to see each other there too? Right? That appreciation, that desire, that love, that warmth. That's what you're talking about. So we put those together and that becomes the operating agreement for the marriage. So then if you have disagreements, you move forward from there. That unifies you instantly onto this is the marriage we're trying to build. Now it's simply a very practical process of removing any and all obstacles, whether that's behaviors or environmental challenges or any other issues that are popping up. Let's remove or reduce the friction from any complicating variables that are deviating from this core marriage.
All of the things that I've been able to do is because I have made a phenomenal selection in my partner. And I often talk to folks about, now, doesn't mean you have to have a life partner or be married, but if you choose to, that choice matters. They're going to be able to help you achieve your goals professionally and personally, or they may detract from your ability to do so. So it is a choice that matters. And I say in the section of the book when I talk about Bill, love and resilience matter. And so you hear a very vulnerable and candid story about our life together and how we learned the importance of being there for one another, having a shared purpose, having shared goals, working through what it means to have a family with 2 careers. You hear more about our relationship in a mixed race marriage and some of the struggles that we faced as a result of that, but how we found love and forgiveness and a way forward in spite of that in ways that I think are hopeful and inspiring.
Well, it goes back to your point about how life and work don't have to be this bifurcated worlds. They don't have to be the bifurcated worlds. It can be like the collaborative space where
Right.
life and work come together. And I think what's also interesting, and I think this is a secret. This is a secret. It's the secret to success in business. And you're talking about it in depth. And that is everybody in business wants to talk about the transactions. They want to
Right.
talk about what you can give them, what they need from you. I'm from accounting and I need these numbers. I'm from this department, I need this. And it's constantly transaction, transaction, transaction. But when we take the time to get to know humans,
Which is so critical. Like it is the secret sauce of life. And it absolutely
relationships,
should apply in business. I think my success is without a doubt based on the relationships, the partnerships, the people who have poured into me and continue to pour into me. And I consider it a privilege and an obligation to pay that forward. It is, in fact, while I was working, and even now in this next season of my life where I'm still working, but doing it in different ways, I'm a fan of having an agenda, right? I do talk about process is sexy when used in the best ways to really help teams stay focused on the things that matter and to simplify and streamline and take out complexity. But instead of just jumping into here are the things I need from you and here's the timeline by which I need it, I always start with a genuine, how are you? Right? And not performative. Like, how are you? And I try to steer people to talk to me about how are they doing outside of work first, right? Help me understand more about what inspires you, what gives you joy, what gives you energy, maybe what depletes your energy. What are the things, quite frankly, that maybe you may be struggling with outside of work that could be getting in the way of something that's going on at work, or something that's giving you so much passion and joy that you're bringing that into the workplace as well. And I have found at times our agendas have adapted as a result of what someone has shared with me. They may be going through something that I was not aware of that takes us in a completely different direction. And we are problem solving around that. Maybe they need childcare. The childcare that they've had has been disrupted and it's impacting their ability to show up for work in the right way. Another leader I recall talking to, much to my surprise, was dealing with a parent who was aging and they had elder care issues. Again, these were things I had no idea were happening to them. And yet when they felt like there was a safe space, a trusted space where they could share, hey, I'm still on the team. I still want to be someone you can count on. Like, I still want to win. But here are the barriers to that right now that I could use some help working through. Like, that to me is what leadership is all about, and how we can show up for each other as humans and allow ourselves to deal with this thing that I just think is almost impossible, so-called balance, right? I don't believe in balance per se. It's this idea that our needs ebb and flow. And I hope that over our lifetime, we get some semblance of balance, but things are never perfectly balanced. And so if we just make that foundational and understood, we can begin to work openly, candidly, honestly towards making sure that every day we have the support that we need to do our best and be our best. And no one can do it alone. Like this myth that being a leader means you have all the answers and it's lonely at the top, and being a leader can be isolating. Like, I don't believe in that. Like, we need to be doing things together and in community. And that go aloneness is something that I think we need to debunk and really focus on how we get better together, utilizing the expertise and strength that comes when you have a diverse, high-performing team.
Imbalance is something that we all live with, and imperfection is something that once we accept, we have a little bit more value of understanding the imbalance, right? We know that we're going to be imperfect. We know that we're going to dedicate more time to one area of our life than the other at certain times. This imbalance is made palatable by awareness. But here's the other secret part to what you're saying, and that is, with these relationships, the more we get to know Cindy or Bob or Judy and their lives, they accept our imperfections as well. Absolutely. Because they like us. That means that we can say the wrong thing to them because we're imperfect, and we can come back and say, hey, you know what? I didn't mean it that way. And they go, I know you didn't mean it that way. That's never been who you are, because they know you too.
They know you, exactly. And it's important for leaders to hear that, right, Scott? Because I think what happens as you become more senior, there is this expectation that you are perfect, that you've been put on a pedestal, that your life is somehow perfect and shiny as well. And that's just not true. And just, I think the more vulnerable a leader can be, and to say, look, I don't have all the answers. That's why we need a team, right? And I too have struggles outside of work and need help. I think that vulnerability and showing humanity really helps our teams look up to us and have more trust in us, and know that it's okay for them to also ask for help, and to see that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Yeah, it also works in your family. So these lessons are also lessons that can be reciprocated in our own family. So the other side is, so many times parents put pressure on their children to be what they were not, but forget how difficult it was to get where they are today, and they did not get there overnight. But if we understand what they're going through, how they're going through it, we're sharing with them. I tell my sons, who are both teenagers, all the time at all the things I failed at, and how proud I am of them that they're making better decisions than me, that I was searching for something and going through things that I don't want them to have to go through, but I share my failures instead of only sharing the successes. the year I sold my business, my oldest son asked me, he goes, "Dad, you made a comment and I don't understand it." And I said, "What is it?" He goes, "You said that it was the most successful year of your career in your life and the hardest year of your life. Like it was challenging in a way that you never dreamed." And I said, "It was the worst year of my life. Like,
Well, you
I don't
learn a lot then. You just learned a ton, right? Failure is a part of
perfect.
learning.
It's the
Absolutely.
uncomfortability of being completely uncomfortable,
Mhm.
not knowing what's coming next, the uncontrollability, hoping that everything you've laid out as a plan is perfect. I mean, it's no different than you after 32 years at Target, you've launched into a new endeavor,
Which
and this is
is
challenging, right?
It is super challenging. But, I often say that as humans, we're perfectly imperfect and that life is about progress versus perfection. And so we're constantly evolving. And I think that is so important. And if you're not failing, then you're not trying hard enough, right? Failure is an important part of leadership. I think the important thing, though, is to learn from those mistakes, right? They shouldn't be career ending, they shouldn't be life ending, but they should be an opportunity to truly learn and grow and apply those learnings. And so in so many parts of my life, I'm like, I'm going to fail, but I'm going to fail fast, right? I'm going to test, learn, iterate, fail, apply the learnings and get back up and test, learn, iterate, fail, and allow myself to move forward in ways that make that failure worth it. And I hope then by example, it shows others that taking risks, calculated risks, smart risks is a great way to learn and grow. And I do talk a bit about, your risk appetite in the book. So often professionally, we talk about a risk appetite. But in this context, I'm asking people to think about it in their personal lives. What is the kind of risks you're willing to take? How do you make sure as a part of your life and leadership plan that you're really thoughtful about what that means, both in your personal and professional life? It shouldn't mean no risk. And it will never mean that you have no time in your life where you're uncomfortable. You've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable because I do think on the backside of discomfort and that risk is often opportunity. And it leads to that if you can work your way through it. And then that tingling of fear and anxiety that comes will feel more familiar in a way that you're actually more excited about it because there's something great on the other end.
I talk a lot about ROM on this show, and ROM is what my wife and I call rekindle our marriage. And when our youngest son was 2 years old, we had this moment where I thought I was doing everything right. And I was taking my oldest son everywhere and giving her space and letting her bond with the new baby. And I was really taking away, as she said, all the fun parts because,
Yeah.
there's so much, you think that you're doing the right thing and we were missing each other. And so we go on this trip and we're on this boat and we're going across, and our listeners have heard this. So if you've heard it, I'm sorry. But we're going across to Tortola to go get on a catamaran. And my wife goes, this is our ROM weekend. It's rekindle our marriage. And what we realized was this is something we started to do all the time on the regular. And so your journey and your mission so resonates with me, and I know our audience, because what you're doing is helping to put down your best ideas, helping to see from what you've learned. What are some things that you're teaching in this book to help them have a sustainable, exciting marriage?
Well, I want to start with what you just shared. I love this, Rom. This is amazing because I think the first idea is that we put a lot of energy into so many things, and we have a delusional idea that the relationship should just be on autopilot or work for us or give to us without us really approaching it from we need to give to it. And so I have 4 pillars that run through the book. And so you can kind of assess where you are in your relationship in a way that helps to organize it a bit because it's so many, can feel very overwhelming. Where do we even begin? And then it kind of offers like a roadmap. And what you were speaking about reminded me of pillar 3, which is priority. And especially once you have children, there's so many things that become a wedge or a triangle that gets in the way of our connection. And it's a foundation for everything in our lives other than our, first and foremost, our relationship with ourselves. So what people can get in the book is to kind of get an assessment first and foremost of where are we and where are the pain points in my relationship. And naming those can really give us a lot of power and control to know at least what we're dealing with. And then from there, what are some of the components from amidst these 4 pillars that we can start building and creating and healing to start getting not only a heal where you've had issues, but really it should be never ending in terms of the fulfillment. It should be ever growing.
Isn't
We're
it?
really doing it as it's intended.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how I always feel that what you don't realize when you go into a long-term relationship or marriage, like, I've been married 23 years, and you don't realize that there are cycles or seasons, and each season or cycle is different. There's even sometimes cycles within the year that you're in. We both of our boys live away now, and one is still under 18, but he plays for a soccer academy. So it's a unique stress on the family that creates a new environment. But when they both come into the house, we have this new rhythm now as empty nesters, that we have this normal rhythm that we've gotten into. And then they come into the house for the month of Christmas and everything changes. And so it's a completely different dynamic. You go from being the most important person, the only person, to being the least important person as the husband. And it's natural and normal as well. But I think it's interesting because you have to constantly be working at this. This isn't something that just all of a sudden you wake up, you figure it out, and you've got it forever, right?
Exactly. And that's what keeps it creative and fresh, is that it is ever evolving. But it catches us off guard often. And it's family dynamic. So we are family. So it is, and that's one of my most favorite topics these days too, is talking about that transition to being an empty nest couple, and how to both enjoy it and embrace it, and how to handle that transition, but how to prepare for it. Because in my counseling practice, I see couples who are in trouble because they really leaned on the kids so much as a basis for what brought them together, that they're really, kind of fumbling with how to connect.
We talked about how Jamie Gruber decided that he had this executive role and he's making $400,000 a year and he's been working super hard to get it. He moves his family to Michigan, weeks into it, he hates it. And he decides that during COVID, he decides that he's going to quit and move to the Dominican Republic with his wife and kids. And I was really interested in the decision making of the spouse, right? And how she supported that. And he said, and you'll understand the correlations here, right? So he said, I told my wife what I wanted to do, and she just said, okay. She didn't question it. She didn't ask me. She didn't make me feel bad about it. She just supported me. It almost made me uncomfortable, where the week before he said I was just absolutely are you sure? What? I'm trying to find a way to blow it up. And she's just completely sure. She's like, what's the worst that can happen? We get poor? She said, I've been poor. I grew up in the DR. What is that? I have everything I need. What do we need when we break it all down? And so in that conversation, I'm thinking about the great things in life, in marriage, in my relationship, in his relationship, in yours, how we choose to follow each other, even when sometimes it's just blind trust that we're taking, right? But it also goes back to having found the right person, growing together, trusting each other. It's a pattern. And it doesn't mean that there aren't things that you get frustrated about, or you're learning how to still deal with in your marriage, in your life. My wife will trust me on all the biggest things, but some of the little things that I need her to trust me on aren't trusted on, and you have to argue about stupid stuff, dumb stuff, and you're you trust me to do all these things, but this is a stupid question. And it goes both ways, right? She's handling 90% of the things with the kids in certain areas, and then I supersede and come in like I'm a superhero and I can fix everything, and it's not always well received, right? These are the things where I go in one conversation to feeling like you have the greatest partnership and relationship, and then the tiniest thing, you can go home and be like, Why are we arguing about this stupid thing? But if you don't take the time to reflect, this is the point I was getting at. If you don't take the time to reflect, talk it out, write it out, whatever it is, you don't see the value. We had a great conversation in the office yesterday about divorce, and one of our people said, "I wish I could go back to all the people who are thinking about getting divorced and tell them how stupid it is, and how you think all these things are going to change, but all it does is make everything harder. It makes you feel more alone." That, of course, there are lots of divorces that are mandatory, or they're abusive situations, and I'm not trying to generalize. I'm just saying that so often in marriages, it's so simple, and that somebody says, "Oh, I'm just not in love with them anymore," or because they don't feel a spark in a moment in time. And every single person that's been in a long-term relationship has had moments where they're not super excited about being around that person. Sometimes it's days, sometimes weeks, months, sometimes years for people. I've asked 60-year-olds, 60-year-olds. I've asked people that have been married for 60 plus years about this particular topic, and they'll tell you there were years that we definitely were not on the same page. And so in talking about that, it makes you think, and then it provides perspective. And so if you don't take the time to listen, reflect, talk it out, share your ideas with other people, write it down, you often don't get to see the good stuff. The good stuff rises to the top when you think about it. Your brain does a really good thing for you. It keeps you from getting lost in the negative. But in the moment, it could be so negative.
I was in an event one time. I won't even say where. It was a personal development thing and a growth thing. And I was in a room, and a guy says to the room, it was a smaller group, and he says, I'm on this personal journey, and my wife just doesn't want to grow. And I don't understand it. It's driving me absolutely crazy. And I just don't know what kind of future we have. And the trainer in front of the room, who had just recently left his wife and was dating a much younger girl, says, I found myself in the same exact position. He started with, I found myself in the same exact position. And he starts like defining that these two are actually both right. And I raised my hand in this room and I said, guys, I don't know what world we're living in right now, but can I ask you how long your personal journey has been? And he goes, well, I just started in the last year and a half. And I said, how long have you been married? It's like 20 years. And I said, buddy, I don't know. I'm not the teacher here, but I have to tell you, let your wife come around to personal growth on her own journey. And you know what? Maybe she doesn't have to grow as much as you do. And everybody kind of started laughing, and the room got easy. And he came up to me afterwards. He goes, thank you for that. I was really worried. And I said, buddy, you were leaning towards a path where you're ready to get rid of a 20-year marriage because you decided to read a John Maxwell book or something like that. That can't be the path that we go on here.
Well, yeah. And I think it just speaks to our own denial that we often live in our lives, our own sort of justifications for our choices and behaviors. And we have, I always say, like, personal development and doing this work and really understanding your primal question, how it drives your life, it's an opportunity to say, I'm on to me. Okay. Like, I actually know what I'm doing here. As I'm talking about how my wife needs to grow or whatever that narrative is, it's like, oh, I see what's going on here. It's actually about me. It's about my need that I'm trying to get met, has nothing to do with her. And I think anytime we can use any sort of complaint or any sort of negativity in our lives to actually step back and say, what is the opportunity here for growth, not for other people, but for me? That to me is like a leader who is going to thrive in their lives. That is an individual who's going to reach new levels of success. But this sort of, we have so many blind spots, Scott, including myself. And there's so many things that just make sense in my world because I'm the one telling myself that. And that's just a very dangerous place to be. And so this is why we do this work. This is why we have these conversations about kind of the core drivers of our life. understanding what is the need that we have that is asking for us to pay attention to it, and start paying attention to it, start working on it. But the solution is never external, it's always internal.
Yeah, it's funny how we have to separate from ourselves and kind of look at ourselves from the outside in with this self-awareness. I feel like sometimes as we get older, we're able to step away. I know I'm able to step away from the decision or the reaction, and not always, by the way, but where I actually almost remove myself from it and say, hey, you've got to respond in a different way. And it may not be as fast as I want. It may not be exact, but it's a science of learning. It's growing. It's that awareness that comes in that we start to pay attention to. And but I think self-awareness is something that I don't know that it's taught very often. And today, in the day and age of social media, for example, so much of how people see themselves are in the eyes of others. It's how they present themselves. The kids want to have the perfect post. They want to have, I'm in Chicago right now, and I could show you the cool room or the perfect picture or whatever. But the reality is none of that matters. What matters is how I feel. Am I having a great time? How are the people that I'm with? What is the experience we're having? Are we going to leave and have good stories? But so much of today's pressure in social media is a challenge.
I remember listening to the 5 Love Languages with Gary Chapman as we drove to a wedding, and our youngest cried all the way up and all the way back. And the stress of having 2 children was very challenging. It also happened to be that I was in the world of finance, and it was 2009 that this happened. And 2008 and 2009 were 2 very challenging years in the financial world. And so I was making less money for the first time in my career after having record years every year. And then all of a sudden I'm making less money, and I don't feel connected the way that we were. I thought I had fatherhood figured out. 3 years in, I was ready. I was good. I didn't have anything figured out. We didn't have anything figured out. We were just doing our best. But these snags that we hit, we had to find a solution. And so after all these things, we were still investing, we were learning, we were trying, but we decided to go on a trip. And early on in our marriage, I set the precedent that I didn't travel a lot growing up. So we were going to take trips every time we had a chance. And luckily, the company that I worked for, we earned 2 great trips a year. They were elaborate and 5-star hotels. They were beautiful things that we normally couldn't even afford at the time. And I'm forever grateful for those experiences. I'm even more grateful for this, because in this story, we end up heading out to the Caribbean. We're in the British Virgin Islands. We're on a ferry heading to Tortola or somewhere like that, St. John's. I don't remember exactly where we are. I can almost see what we're wearing. That's how impactful this moment was to me. And Adrienne kind of gives me a hug. She comes in and she kind of leans into me and looks up at me. And I still remember it. And she goes, "Hey, this is our ROM week." And I said, "ROM? I like the way that sounds, but I don't know what ROM means." And if you listen to me and you've listened to my videos before, you know what ROM means, but I'm going to explain it to anyone that's never listened before. And so ROM, she goes, means rekindle our marriage. And I said, "Well, we need that. And I know exactly what we need to do." And she goes, all right, listen, we're going to work on it together. And we started a week of just reconnection. ROM and rekindling our marriage was about having moments where we forgot that we were parents, that we forgot that we were busy with work, or we were challenged in an environment that wasn't perfect, and that we were maybe making a little less money than the year before, or whatever it was about each other. It was about reconnection, about reestablishing the right kinds of boundaries, reinvesting in each other. It was about actually learning what we needed to learn about growing up together, because we were kids. We got married in our early 20s. We were kids, and we had to learn what each other needed. And so a ROM week, or even a ROM weekend, really is a trip to remove yourself from everything you normally do.
So it cannot be the norm. You cannot do this in your house. It's very difficult. You can have a great moment in your house, but you cannot do this in your house. It requires you to separate from the everyday, to separate from the children. And by the way, after the kids are gone, I'm just now kind of feeling what that might feel like. I still believe that this is necessary. You still have to separate from the everyday, because you get into these habits that don't always include each other. And the farther along you go in these habits, the further away you can go from each other. So during a ROM week, obviously intimacy is mandatory. It's mandatory if your love language is physical touch, 100%, but it's also mandatory if you're a man, because every man's love language is physical touch and then something else. So for me, it's words of affirmation. Just knowing that there's good things we're doing together, knowing that she feels that I'm doing the right things for her, that I feel appreciated. These are important. For my wife, it was about being quality time, having time together. I think there's some acts of service in there as I've gotten older, but I'm still trying to figure that one out. The reality was, we also had some adventures. We did some things that were uncomfortable. We did some things together that we didn't normally do. So growing up, I could tell you, when we were dating, if we were both on the beach, I would often go and play soccer or play volleyball or do whatever. And then she would lay out and talk to the girls. And I really tried to be more centered in and around her. And that was me stepping out of my comfort zone. And I know it sounds like it's a no-brainer. And I'm sorry if you're listening to this and you had this figured out so early, but we were two young kids who had just had kids, and we were figuring out 5-6 years into our relationship how to make this an epic, long love story, not something that was just going to be a great relationship, had a couple kids, and gave up. And if we were going to do that, it was going to be really easy to do that. But it was going to be very difficult to keep investing in each other, to listen to each other, to talk about things. I like to go deep. I like to talk about deep topics. And she gave me that time. We had conversations about where we would send the kids to school and what we'd be doing. And I'm looking into the future and the vision. We also had some conversations about what she needed on a day-to-day basis, what she needed help with, things I might not be thinking about that were really important to her and the kids. We focused on reconnection. And we did things throughout, like dinners alone and dinners with couples. I love going out. When we do ROM weeks or weekends, we always seem to meet couples, and they become like immediate friends. You meet in an elevator or you're at the pool and you start talking. And before you know it, you're having this great relationship with these people that you may never see again. But for that week or that weekend, they're your best friends. And so by having a dinner alone and focus just on each other, but also having time with other people, when you're with other people, it gives you a chance to see why you love the other person. I always get to see the things I love about my wife when we're around other people. I love her confidence. I love her discipline. I love the ability that she has to make the room feel better, or to laugh at herself, or to say anything and not worry about what anyone else is thinking. I don't always see that when it's just the two of us. But when I'm with her alone, or when I'm with her with someone else, I really notice it, because it makes me laugh. It makes me feel good. It takes pressure off of me in the conversation, because I know she's going to say something funny or something interesting. And I'm using this example because I think so often we think it can only be the two of us, but it really can't. The recipe includes experiencing life with other people. This is one of the biggest challenges that some of the most successful people that I know have, is successful relationships. And it's not just with their spouse or partner. It could be just with their children, with their family. This is life-changing. And if you do what you're teaching, it could really make a difference.
I've got some great examples. I had a gentleman come in, very, very successful guy, media guy. And he said to me, I'm going through a very nasty divorce. He says, we're going to be going into mediation. He says, but I also love your performance part of it. I want to perform better. So I'm really coming to you for performance, but I'm also so stressed out about this divorce and the mediation I'm going through. So I take him through the program. He absolutely loves it. And he said, even the people like on the shows that he was on were saying, "You're so much calmer. Like you just nailed that interview. It was really good." So he says, from that side of it, it really helped me. And then he called me the day before. He says, "I got the mediation tomorrow. Got any ideas, any thoughts for me before I go through it?" And I said, "Just do the tools that we taught you, right? And you'll be fine." He calls me the next day and he said, "Would you be willing to speak to my wife?" And I said, "Sure." I said, What's up?" He says, "I sat in the mediation across from her and couldn't remember why I was divorcing her." He says, "I thought I hated her. I didn't hate her. I loved her. But all my trauma had such an impact on me, I was taking it out on her. And I created all this anger and frustration." He goes, "And I realized I loved this woman. I couldn't come up with a reason why I was divorcing her." And so they're back together. And that
So
was from the worst mediation and divorce that he told me how bad it's going to be, to literally realizing he had no anger, no hatred in his heart. And then I had another one that's really interesting, which is the reversal of that on a positive, though. So she had a lot of trauma. The husband knew about what I did, loved it, said, "I'm going to send my wife in. I know she's got a lot of trauma." It definitely improved their relationship. And so he was very happy about that. But then she ended up wanting a divorce. And what he said to me is, he says, she realized that she didn't marry me because she loved me. She married me because I was secure, and she never had security and safety. So he became her safe place, but she wasn't in love with him. And so they ended up divorcing. He's now married to his college, or getting married to his college sweetheart, right? And they have a great relationship. So it turned out really positive, but the relationship wasn't what she was really looking for.
It's so interesting. I mean, it's amazing how trauma impacts so many levels of your life, whether it's the anxiety you feel in work, whether it's, where you say you're not sabotaging, but a lot of people will say they're self-sabotaging themselves in the careers. Every time they get a chance to go to the next level, they tend to blow it up. And I know you work with a lot of professionals in sports and major performers, and you find that working with them in on these things can help them break through, right? Because that's a really big challenge. They kind of hit that wall, and it's almost like they need something to help them break through. And just working through this diagnostic is something that will guide them when they hit those moments.
It's amazing. So on the psychological side, it's a obvious one. So I work with professional athletes. If they're dealing with, a trauma from earlier in their life, it will have an effect. It could be a trauma from their sport. So they could have. I had one guy who's a runner. He's an Olympic runner, and he tore his knee up on a turn. And then what he said is they're timing him, and every time he gets to one of those turns, he pulls back a little bit and didn't know why, right? But because his mind was looping through, this is where we get hurt, and was seeing it in real time. And so once you get that out of the way, it makes a major impact. But the other area that I talk about is that it actually affects the mitochondria, the energy in the cell. And people aren't aware of that. So I've got all kinds of examples of people, as long as the trauma loop is running, it's pulling power. And that power is going to affect performance. So after people have gone through the program, they start making personal bests and don't know why. So one that's a really interesting one is a gentleman, Marco Chesapeake. And Marco was a double amputee. He lost both his legs to a suicide attempt, and he was a marathon runner from Kenya. So they built him prosthetics to walk on and blades to run on again. But they called me up and said he's plateaued. He's not improving no matter how much work we're doing with him. Like, it seems he's hit a peak level. Can you take him through the process and see if you can improve his times? So Marco came in to see me. 9 days later, runs in a marathon and takes 15 seconds per mile off his time.
Wow.
And then a month later, runs in the Boston Marathon and breaks the world record for marathoners with amputations. And then 2 months later, runs in the Chicago Marathon, breaks his own world record by another 5 minutes, and gets signed by Nike. And what I said to him, I said, Marco, I didn't make you faster. You were always that fast. You didn't have access to that power. And so I worked with a group that worked with professional athletes, and I took them through the sort of program showing them how this can improve performance. And the one guy said to me, he goes, you just blew my mind. He says, we work with these professional world top athletes and never understood why they would go into a sympathetic nervous system response when they were at rest, because they're monitoring them constantly. He says, you're telling me that's the trauma loop? I said, yeah. He goes, we never understood that. It made no sense to us why their system would go into that active sympathetic response when they're doing nothing. Now they got it. So these are the best in the world at their sport and are still dealing with it. Imagine what happens when you eliminate that stress response.
It's a release, huh? It's literally like a release of that negative energy that's just continuously holding you back. Uh,
And even
it's
high performers, the best in the world, still have another gear. And so all you have to do is help them get to that next gear. And again, I never take the credit for them being better athletes. I just say, I just helped you access what you didn't have access to, but you've always had it within you. So I'm not making them faster. I'm making their potential right there so that they can reach their potential.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And with athletes, it's no different than people in work and high performers. We see it all the time in leadership. I can't tell you how many performance reviews I've done where part of it is, I see this amazing talent. I see this human that has so much potential, and I know and believe in you, but I can't believe in you enough for you to achieve these things. You have to achieve these things. And that you could see them struggling with that very flip of a conversation where they're like, I just don't know what I need to be doing. And we know what they need to do. There's probably just something that they have to release. There's something that they need to work through to help them really accomplish that next level.
And those emotional concussions that we talked about earlier can sometimes do that. And in the book I wrote, here are 10 things that successful people don't do, as opposed to saying, here's what successful people do. Why are you procrastinating? So I had a lady come in, very successful entrepreneur, doing really well, but she says, well, I procrastinate all the time. And so she says, I just feel like I work better under pressure. And I said, no, you don't. Nobody does. Right. And so she said, but I don't know where the procrastination came from. And so when we look back, her mother was the principal at the school she went to. And she explained to me, she says, I remember when I was doing my homework, my mother would have me come into her office. She would look at my homework. She says, I remember that red pen. She'd take out this red pen and start underlining all my mistakes. And so as we look through it, is her mind didn't want to be criticized. So the longer if her mother got really busy, she didn't have time to do it. So if she could push it off, she avoided the hurt. Her mother wasn't trying to hurt her, but she was taking it, I'm not measuring up to what my mother wants. I'm getting too many things wrong. And so because she was her own boss, right, she could push things off the last minute. Nobody could then override her or tell her what she did wrong.
If you like clips like this, I have a similar clip here. And if you want to watch the full video, click here.